Yesterday, I discovered the fingerprints of God, and I discovered it whilst I'm walking somewhere around this area in Tail or Moncrief. It's a hill in between Tail and Moncrief, and I just I've been dropped into my house by my brother in the night, and I'd eaten so much that I had to go for a walk just to walk down the belly load of food so that I could sleep. And as I was walking around this area at night, I was thinking, noting, and understanding a whole lot of things. But yeah, I discovered the fingerprints of God yesterday whilst walking around this area in Taylor Moncrief. And I've been picking it up like little by little before, but it became extra more plain to me last night. And I've noticed that whenever I learn like one spiritual lesson, I realize that the very next time I'll learn that same spiritual lesson again in its completion, I will find myself in a place or in a situation very similar to the one I had learned of, very similar to the one that I was in the one that I had before. And I realized that ideal of like, I learn one thing here, and when that thing is completed somewhere else, the place in which I learned the completion of that first lesson either was me back in that same place again, or in another place that complemented the first place. So I realized that my spiritual lessons in learning like the ways of God and the ways of the Lord God would dilate in that the beginning phase and the ending phase could always and did always parallel. And that's what I've been discovering like personally in my life, that the Lord closes what He started in practically the same way as He ends it. I repeat again, the Lord closes the end of a lesson like He had begun it in the first stage. That's what I've noticed. And I realized also that if I was paying attention, ordinary everyday like activities, like in my circumstances, I will look around and I'll see this and that, and they could implicate practically what the Lord was speaking to me in that circumstance. So I will say I'm reasoning on this or that, or I've realized this. And normally I came to realize that when I looked around me, or later I'll go back and think of the things that were around when I was noticing those things, that I realized that my circumstances were always speaking a story. Now, this idea of the Lord speaking in like circumstances and ideas and such and such, like I said, it isn't that new to me. I'd known of it before, but my first knowledge of it was apart from biblical prophecy, because the Lord prophesies all through the Bible, was in our names. Like the Lord takes names very seriously. For example, say when Saul was called, Christ changed his name from Saul to Paul. And Simon Peter, he renamed Peter. So there is a thing to names. And I know of it in the Bible, like say In the Bible, Daniel, his name means God is my judge. And the prophet Elijah, his name means that Jehovah is God. And those names that they had, they complemented the lives that they lived in their lives. And also how Jacob, when he had overcome with the Lord, when he struggled with that angel Puniel, when he was going to meet his brother Isaac, when he was returning home, and he was so afraid of his brother wiping him and his family out that he prayed and prayed and prayed and wrestled with God to the morning. His name was changed from Jacob, which meant supplanter, to Israel, the prince with God. That's what Israel meant. And so you note that when his destiny or his state changed, that the Lord changed his name as well. So names in the Bible are actually important. They have significance. But I realized that in my very own life and the people that I knew around me, I could actually see messages in those people's names. For example, there's a man called Jason Westerfield in America, and I first learned of this man, I believe in 2009, when this man named Darren Wilson made a movie called The Finger of God, where he was going around like depicting like people who are actually seeing real miracles in their lives. Here and there, like, yeah, people who saw God come and touch them or use them tangible in their lives, that people could actually see the evidence of it, so that he will send that documentary around the world just to let people know that God isn't dead and he's still out there doing his works. And this man, Jason Westfield, was in that movie, in that documentary. And Jason, like, he was a very humble man. Very humble. He would be out there every day in the universities preaching. And in his own testament, he was saying that, he said how when he came to Christ, that God was schooling him and teaching him all sorts of things about how he should live, similar to myself. He was schooling him and teaching him. He will guide him here, he will guide him there. And he gave this one example of how once he was walking through the park, or, walking through the streets rather, and as he was walking, like, he heard God said, make a right turn or something like that. And he's like, why should I make a right turn? I don't get it. So he kept on walking, and then he walked straight into a sign. He bumped his head into a sign. So God was using him and teaching him things in a very powerful and specific way, which may seem mundane, but he was showing his ways, his power, his actions. And this man, he came to like experience like great and powerful miracles like you wouldn't believe, supernatural signs. But I believe there's this man called James Goll, who's also another prophet in the charismatic movement, and he spoke of a Christian who was mighty in God, doing great wonders and such, and how he came to a certain point in his life. He was planning to go and invest in seeing angels, like angels more proper, like angels in the flesh. He was going to go and like pray to God that his angels would come and meet him, interact with him, all that kind of stuff. And James Goll and Bill Johnson, they said to him, yo man, you mean well to do this, but don't. This is dangerous area. Don't go seeking after angels. Leave them alone. But the guy decided just to ignore it and do it anyway. And later on, because of that, he stepped out of the faith and he went into his own place, his own area, his own place, and rejected God outright. And I read that testimony in a man's book, and I realized that the man that James Goll was talking about was actually Jason Westerfield, because Jason Westerfield, just like he was experiencing great and powerful moves of God, seeing miracles here and there, he was seeing the glory of God manifest in his own personal life. But there came a point in his life that we all stopped hearing about him. And then when we next heard about him again, he was into the new age. And he was blaspheming Christ, having nothing to do with him, talking about stars and filth and sex, all sort of things that you wouldn't hear believers talk about. And Bill Johnson, the minister who used to host him the most, was saying how he had come to preach in one of their conventions, but then instead of him preaching, he was dissimulating and spreading defilement among the people, making them want to reject the Lord and run away. That was what he was doing, rather. So Jason Westerfield was a powerful man of God to begin with, but then he went his way. He left the Lord and went to serve devils than to stay in the truth, because he received some offense in a certain way and he didn't handle it, just rejected the Lord. But when I saw his name, Jason and Westerfield, the first thing that I thought of after learning his fall was that his last name implied that he will go too far. Westerfield. So I go west, and I go west even more in the field. Westerfield, which implies that he will leave his state and go where he should not go, wester. But then his first name, Jason, I realized it's the same as Jason the Argonaut in Greek myth. The man who gathered his friends to go traveling around the ancient Grecian world, looking for wonders and such, and the golden fleece and all that, the golden camel, the golden ram. So his first name was after Jason the Argonaut, the famous Grecian traveler, and then his second name is Westerfield, implied as became later in his life that he was a traveler, he was a seeker of God, and he found the Lord. But when he found the Lord, he went too far where he should have gone. So I noticed that his name actually implied what became of him in his life. And there's another man too. There's a man called John Gacy, and John Gacy was a serial murderer in America in the 70s. Now, what he did was that he coerced young men to sleep with him at his house, and then killed them and buried them underneath his ground floor. And the police were looking for him for years. For 7 years, they were looking for him, and they could not find him. And in those years, he killed, I believe, 11 or more so young men. And the man, he wasn't initially gay, but he became gay. And now she perceived his name is John Gacy, as if the idea of being gay or homosexual was placed in his name. And the way it sounds like, it's like it's saying gay, see? Intonation. And the name John means God is gracious. So his name was implying the very act that he did and became. That was his point. And there's more people like that. If you look through history and you see people and what they're named, you realize that what became of them in their life. You could see in their names, like I said about the prophet Elijah and Daniel. Like Daniel, when the Persians took over the Babylonian Empire, the jealous ministers, knowing how powerful and how respected he was, tried to kill him so that they could take his place and get him out the way. But when they tried to kill him, like his name said, Daniel, God is my judge, God vindicated him and saved him supernaturally, so that those jealous ministers couldn't triumph over him because he was virtuous. The king ruled against him through his ministers, but God vindicated him. God was his judge, so his name became prophetic in his life. And like I was saying, like thinking of names and such, and now the Lord puts like fingerprints in our everyday lives that can tell us things that we're not necessarily even perceiving, and how he likes to he has power over what he starts and what he finishes. Like in the Bible, like there's something called a chiasm, which is like, if you know what a chasm means, it's like a valley, a chasm, a valley, or a gorge. Like when I was growing up, or rather when I was younger, I had my own ideas about prophecy, Bible prophecy, and my church taught something else. But then one of our church pastors or church ministers came to my house, gave me like a Bible prophecy like lesson to show me things. And at that time, like, it didn't really come through, but it came through later. But yeah, it came through later. But I noticed that or one thing that I learned from it was that Bible prophecy comes in the form of a chasm, which is like a V, like a valley. It starts with one thing at one end, then it steps down, comes to a middle point, and then it starts going up again on the other side. Another thing, to the top. But what the pastor showed me was that, what the minister was able to show me was that, because he wasn't a pastor, then he was trained to be a pastor, was that the beginning and the end parallel, the middle and the middle parallel, and the central point is the central point, but they all join up together. And in such that they join together, God, like, he made his world, or he made his word to allocate. And you can see like a pattern and a point in it. It was quite beautiful. But yeah, I came to realize that in my own life, when I was learning like spiritual lessons that the Lord was teaching me, that he will close it in the same way that he began it. The initial point, I learn, I think I know something, but then I forget about it and I live. Then when I find something that completes, that gives it power, and I realize that it matches in ideal to the same place and same surroundings and same like feelings that I had when I first learnt it. So like, he showed me that he had power in the way he ordinates and moves, and in the way that he does things, so you can see his actual print on him. Which is why I'm making this video. Because, like I said yesterday, I saw the fingerprints of God. I perceived that God literally and very purposefully leaves fingerprints for us to know that his hand has been at work. And how I learned it was that after a long day, like me and my brother and a friend of mine going around and helping family and doing things during the day, we had come home to my mom's house with my friend, and we had just finished like eating. I was preparing to head back home, but then I decided just to read a bit, like just take the edge off a bit, like read a book and relax and such and such. But instead of reading the book, I chose to like switch face and go and read do you know the dummies books? Yeah, I decided to go and read one of the dummies books, World History for Dummies. And when I opened that, I went, because at the point that I was reading that book, I was reading about the Roman Empire. But I got into that book and I skipped forward like many like of the points that I would have read, and went to where he was talking about the last emperor of Western Rome. Because as you know, like the Roman Empire got split in two. And Constantine went and built Constantinople on the east in Byzantium in Turkey. And he made that became his capital. But the Western Rome, that was where the popes had power. But I didn't know the intricate history of it all. I just knew that there was Eastern Rome and Western Rome, and that Constantinople was capital of Eastern Rome and Rome was capital of Western Rome, and that the emperors eventually switched to rule from Constantinople. But in the West, the popes ruled. But the first one that I read when I went to that part was that he said that in Western Rome, it was ruled, but without authority. It was ruled, but without authority. In the sense that there was no emperor there. And they said there was no emperor there because in 476, the last emperor of Western Rome was captured by the barbarians and taken away. And I realized when they said that the last emperor of Western Rome was captured by the barbarians and taken away, that the name of the last emperor was, would you have it, believe it or not, Romulus. And then again, I learned that his other name was actually Augustulus, which which lit a light in my mind like bang. The last emperor of Western Rome is called Romulus. And then again, his other name is Augustulus. And I was like, how amazing is that? How is it that the last emperor of Western Rome was called Romulus? And if you ignore the name Romulus, his other name is Augustulus. That didn't make sense. Why is it that his first name is either Romulus, or if it's not Romulus, then it's Augustulus? Why those two names? Why of all names that the emperor could be called Romulus and Augustulus? It didn't make sense to me, and I just like wondered at that idea for a long time. How can this be? How can this be? Because when you put it together, his first name, he was named Romulus. Who was named Romulus. But then when you ignore the name Romulus, his other name was Augustulus. Whichever way you go, it implies something. It implies something clear and clean. Like you couldn't doubt, you couldn't ignore it. Either it's called Romulus or it's called Augustulus. Romulus, Augustulus. Why those two names? How could this be? it was too amazing. Like, why Romulus, and if not Romulus, Augustulus? There was no other name, Romulus and Augustulus. And I'll say, like, why those two names? Because Romulus was the first king of Rome. He established the Roman Empire in the 7th century BC, or rather the 8th century BC, because when you're counting from before BC, like if it's 700, and that's the 8th century, so it was in the 700 or something BC, so that was the 8th century BC. But the first king of Rome, the king who established the Roman Empire, who built the city of Rome, he was Romulus, the brother of Remus, whom he killed. Romulus. So it's appearing here that the last emperor of Rome was called Romulus, the same as the first king of Rome. And then, as I said before, like if you ignore Romulus, his other name was Augustulus. And Augustulus has exactly the same meaning because the first emperor of Rome was Caesar Augustus. So whichever way you went, it implied the same thing. That was a very amazing idea, or a very amazing principle. It's not an idea, it's the truth. The last emperor has the same name as the first king of Rome, and the same name as the first emperor of Rome. So it's like 2 in 1. They mean the same thing. Same name as the first king of Rome, same name as the first emperor of Rome. And then, like, that struck my mind. That was really interesting, that Rome began and ended with empress of the same name. Can you believe that? With empress of the same name. And I also noted that Romulus wasn't actually killed by the barbarians. He was captured and taken away. He wasn't killed, he was captured, and that has to mean that I'll get to later. But the last emperor of Rome had the same name as the first king and the first emperor of Rome. They went somewhere. And if you know anything about Bible prophecy, you know that the Antichrist power is actually the Roman pontiff, the papacy, the Pope. That's the Antichrist. Like, many Christians talk about the Antichrist coming in the last days, but the Antichrist had come and is even here now to this day. And also, like, many Christians believe that there will be a 3.5 year tribulation and then Christ will return. But they don't know that 3.5 year tribulation that's prophesied in the Bible has already happened and finished in 1798. Like, four centuries ago. 1798. That's when the 3.5 year great tribulation ended, on 1798. And if you don't know, when the Bible says 3.5 years, or I believe 42 months, it means 3.5 years, 42 months, or 1,260 days, which is the length of time in the 3.5 years. But that's what Bible prophecy teaches, that the Antichrist power will have its power for 1,260 days. And when he said 1,260 days, it meant 1,260 years. Not days, years. And that has actually already happened. And I'm going to drop it here. Like, when it happened, the point from which the 1,260-day prophecy began was in 538 AD, when Pope Basilius was named the chief pontiff and commander of Rome, or ruler of the Western Roman Empire, where Romulus was captured from. And this is how I learned that there is a fingerprint of God in all the things that we see and know and learn, that we don't necessarily even discern. In 476 AD, when Emperor Romulus was captured from which we have said there was a void in power in Western Rome, till 538 AD, when Pope Basilius was made the ruler of the western part of Rome, the supreme leader of Western Rome. The other emperors still continued to rule from Constantinople in Eastern Rome, but in the West, the papacy, or the Pope, became the ruler. So I noticed that the chasm of the void of authority in Western Rome, or the whole of authority in Western Rome, from when Emperor Romulus was taken away, of which I noted he wasn't killed, he was just taken away. That void wasn't filled till 538 AD. And the reason how I noticed this was that when I was reading the book, I noted Constantine, and I went and checked how long he lived, because when I was reading, it was implying that Theodosius, who was the successor after him, was his very next successor, and that didn't make sense to me. So I went to check when Theodosius lived and when Emperor Constantine lived, and I realized that Constantine lived from 272 to 337. He lived for 65 years. So the time stamp of the 65 years was on my mind. So when I noted that Emperor Romulus was taken away in 476 AD, and that the Roman pontiff became like the ruler of Western Rome in 538 AD, that timestamp of time was in my mind. So I linked it quickly and easily, and I realized that the length of time where there was a void in authority in Western Rome until the papacy took over was 60, and mark my words, 2 years. 62 years. So for 62 years, there was a void in power or true authority in Western Rome, until the popes became the ruler of Rome and the Western Roman Empire. That's what I noted. 62 years. And like I said, I've been reasoning what's God saying in this circumstance and in that circumstance? What does this mean and what does that mean? Because I perceive that in everyday occurrences, in names and numbers and all that, there were messages in there that you could pick out if you are spiritual enough to reason, to think, and to see it. And I noticed that, at first, 62 years seemed like a mundane number, apart from the number 60, because that implied 66. It seemed mundane, and I thought, I'm just trying to see what I want to see, so I'm just fooling myself. Till in that night, when I was walking around this area, then I noted that 60 implies the number 6. We know what the number 6 is. But 2, the number 2, actually also has a meaning, because the length of time in which there was no authority in Rome wasn't 66 years that I can say, that's obvious, that's the mark of the beast on the on the empire, but 62 years. So I was like, well, there could be something there, there may not be something there, so I was more inclined to ignore it. Then I realized that the 60 implied the 6, but the 2 actually also implied something as well, because the number 2 is the same as the word 2. So it was like they were saying 6, 2. 6 from the Roman Empire or pagan Rome, 2 papal Rome. 62 years from which pagan Rome or the empress of Rome went in power to when papal Rome began. So 62 years from which the rulers of pagan Rome were passed down to papal Rome. So 62 years marked the void of time between pagan Rome and papal Rome beginning to rule. And like I said, the number 2 sounds like the word 2, so 6, 2. But then I noted also, whilst I was walking around here, that when you think of the number 2, what is the number 2? What's the number 2? Number 2 is the sum of 1 plus 1. Do you get it? Clear and obvious. There was a message in the number, because 6 was carried down from pagan Rome and given to papal Rome, and the void of time was 60 years and 2 years, so 62, 6, 2. And then papal Rome took over pagan Rome, and papal Rome fulfilled the 1260-day prophecy from 558 AD till 1798 AD in our time, of which he persecuted the church of God, the people of God, until his horn or his head was wounded. And now we're in the time between when the head was wounded and the popes lost their power, to now when that head has been healed by Pope Francis, and the world is waiting on, this is from Revelation chapter 13, and the world is waiting for that beast, the lamb-like beast that rises out of the ground, to cause the world to go back to that first beast whose head was wounded and worship him, and bring us to the next tribulation before Christ comes back, of which when John the Revelator was speaking of it, he said that 10 kings will arise, and when those 10 kings would arise, they all give their power to the beast and reign even for 1 hour. So the time frame of which the next phase of real persecution for God's people will happen will be, according to the Bible, for a space of 1 hour, which just means for a short time. But that's the times that we're in. And yesterday when I was reading, like when I was looking this up, and I came across this revelation, this is what I learned. It was quite amazing, quite spectacular. And now you all know that the Lord speaks to us in every circumstance, in all that happens, even in numbers, even in days. He's making a point. He's always speaking to us. We just don't necessarily perceive it. But I'll end this with like one more like name hit, and this is really interesting on the same topic, because Walter Fight is a teacher on Bible prophecy, and he knows so much and understands so much. It's actually because of him that I understand how Bible prophecy actually works, that I can actually explain all these things to you. But I'll give you the lowdown on his name. Walter Fight. His first name Walter, his last name Fight, and Fight is spelled with a V. And it's actually his middle name is Julius. And I realized upon thinking about his name that because initially he was an atheist and a Catholic, and then he became a Seventh-day Adventist. And then when he became a Seventh-day Adventist, God showed himself to him in powerful, amazing ways, and started to teach him and show him so much about what's actually going on in this world, all those hidden ideals. Like even this morning, like I was watching a YouTube about the rapper Prodigy, and they were talking about how Prodigy, even though he was into the music, he was into making like worldly music, like rap. He was in the music business, the music industry. That he said, like in 1996, he had a revelation, and after he had the revelation, he wrote, like, I'm fearless. I'm gonna take down all these powers because the truth has set me free, and I'm not afraid of any man, because I'm empowered by God and the universe to fight and expose them. He realized that the world was all set up. There was like powers here, powers there, but the governments were really just pretending to be governments, but really they were pure, outright Luciferians, seeking to like expound the agenda of the devil, the agenda of the dragon, and bring the world to the Antichrist, bring the world to Satan, and that he was going to expose all their secrets. I was learning about him and what to fight. Like God started to show him like all those hidden things that people don't even know about. I believe that his first venture was actually into health. He also knows a lot about health, how to be healthy, how to overcome like sickness. The best steps to live healthy. He made a video documentary series called Life at Its Best, of which like he shows like how not to get cancer and how to live so clean that you can't actually even get sick, how to be healed naturally of like any ailment that you may have. But God started to teach him, show him like all that is hidden in the world, what the governments are doing, like what the real truths were, what they tell you and what actually is. Like for example, like in one of his videos, he talked about JFK and how the government arranged to get him killed, but then they showed the world like an opposite picture so that they'll buy that. But really, they took him out on their own accord. But the Lord started to show him like all these hidden things, and he made a lecture series about it called Total Onslaught, where he exposes like all the hidden agendas in the world and how they're actually revealed in the Bible. And it starts from Jesus, and then he goes through like every century, or every millennia up to our time, so that we can know and understand what the Bible prophesied and how the word has actually been matching with it. But Walter Fight, he focuses, he learned that, as I was telling you, that the papacy, the Pope, was the Antichrist, and because he realized that the Pope was the Antichrist, Catholicism was central to all that he taught. Like, he'd always go back to it to explain like what the devil was doing through that false church, and to help people understand it, because he realized that even when he exposed like all these hidden societies and such, that when they all culminated on who? The Pope, the Roman Pope. They always culminated in the Roman Pope. People talk about the Illuminati, but even the founders of the Illuminati, the Rothschilds, their name, Rothschild, as his German, he would know, means red shield. And accordingly, they were bankers. We know they were bankers, but according to Walter Fight, they actually were subordinate to the Pope and the Jesuits. They actually worked for the Jesuits and the popes. So all these evil things that we're hearing about in the world, the Illuminati, this Freemasons, all of that, they are all spiritual, and their head actually goes down to the dragon, and from the dragon to his man in our world, which is the Roman, or his power in our world, which is the papacy. They all come down to the papacy and the Pope. And what the papacy does, and what the papacy stands for, is to present Christ as their God, but in secret they worship the devil, and all these like evil powers and such, they all come back down to them. They are the heads of them, but the world don't know. They see them as a righteous, clean power, and think to honor them, not knowing that they are the seed of the devil. But as I was saying, Walter Fight, his name is Walter Julius Fight, and I realized that his name, as I mentioned of Jason Westerfield, how his name implied what happened to him in his life. Walter Fight, his name, when you break it down and look at it, actually speaks what he is now doing, because Walter sounds like water. Fight, which is spelled with a V, sounds like fight. And what's his middle name? Julius. Walter Julius Fight. Walter fight Julius, or use the water to fight Julius, to fight Rome. That's my message. I pray it bless you, and may the Lord be with you and strengthen you all, give you power, give you faith, inspire you to do great things for his name. In Christ's name I pray. Amen. Bye.